guys, welcome back to my channel, AB Pattern Drafts. Today's video will be talking about introduction to pattern drafting, and we cannot talk about pattern drafting without talking about measurements. I mean accurate measurements. You find some tailors or some designers that have been sewing for a while. They probably know how to make that cut, but they always get the fitting wrong. Why? Because they've got a wrong measurement. So we'll be talking shortly or briefly about taking accurate measurements. Okay, one thing I want you to have at the back of your mind is when taking measurements, there are some tricks or there are some things you need to consider to make your measurements accurate. We have three types of measurements, or rather four, and there are also other many types of measurements, but I'll classify the three basic ones, which are horizontal measurements. These horizontal measurements have to do with measurements you take from side to side. Either you're taking a measurement from the right to the left, or you're taking it from the left to the right. And the kind of measurements you would find under horizontal measurements are your shoulder width. You're putting your tape from the left side to the right side, or from the right side to the left side. From the name horizontal, you know it has to do with going sideways. And the next type of measurement you would be coming across is the vertical measurements. These are measurements you take from top to bottom. Any measurement that has to do with you positioning your tape from the top to the bottom are all classified under the vertical measurements. And you can guess the kind of measurements in this category. When you place your tape from the shoulder point downwards, you want to know the full length of the dress you're making. That is a vertical measurement. If you want to know the length of your waist, you want to know the distance from your shoulder to your waist, that is also a vertical measurement. This applies to any measurement you're taking that has to do with you taking from top to bottom. The third type of measurement that you will be coming across is the circumference measurement, and from the name you know it has to do with you going round. And the kind of measurement that you find under this category is the round bust, because that would require you to take your measurements all round, like so. So I have a little demonstration like so. So you're taking it round, and please, there's something you need to note to have an accurate circumference measurement. You have to make sure that at least you have 2 fingers in between the tape, because you don't want the dress to look like a bandage. So you want some form of ease, so that when the person that's going to wear the dress, or you're going to wear the dress, you would have some form of ease. You don't take the measurement like this. You have to give some form of allowance, some of space, and you have to twist. If the tape doesn't move smoothly, then you know the measurement is too tight. If it moves smoothly, and you don't overdo it, you don't give it too much, because this would like not fit on the person or on yourself. So you just put 2 fingers in like so on the person. But if you're measuring yourself, you can go like this and move, and you're good. So for me, I have 34 here as my bust measurement, and that applies to both the waist, the hip, the round hip, the round waist, the round thigh, the round arm. Yes. So any measurement that you're going to be taking 360-degree has to do with the circumference measurement. But there's a slight difference from when you're taking measurements on the arm, because the circumference of the arm is classified under semi-circumference, because we have 2 arms. So you're not taking a total measurement of your 2 arms coming together. So that is why anytime we take our round arm, we always divide the measurement by 2. But when we take our circumference measurement, which is on the bust, on the waist, and on the hip, we always divide it by 4. I hope we are clear on that. So let's move forward. And now, so after there's another thing you need to take note of when you're taking your shoulder width measurement, and that has to do with you positioning your tape accurately. There's this bone for people on the slim side. There's this bone on the shoulder where you can identify when you place your finger there. You'd place your tape like so, 1 inch beyond that bone. So this is 1 inch. This is 1 inch. So I'm placing my finger on that 1 inch, and that 1 inch will be right on top of that bone. So I can feel the bone here. So I'm going 1 inch beyond the bone, and on the other side of my shoulder, I'm also going 1 inch beyond the bone, which will give me what? 15. So my shoulder width is 15. And the shoulder width is always divided by 2. This is the basic. It's always divided by 2. So when we start pattern drafting, where we put our fabrics on folds, we'll be dividing the shoulder width by 2. And all the circumference measurements, will be dividing them by 4, except for the semi-circumference, which will be divided by 2. When we get to that, you would have a better understanding of how this works in general. Okay, so I'll be doing a brief illustration on the board on how to start your pattern. One thing you should have at the back of your mind when you want to start pattern drafting, there should be a beginning line, a guideline, I mean. A guideline, I mean at the top and at the side. Remember, we're working with vertical measurements and we're working with horizontal measurements. So the top line at the top, that's where you start taking all your vertical measurements from. The tape will be placed at that line. And when you want to start taking your horizontal measurements and your circumference measurements, you're going to place your tape by the side to the other side. So let's start like so. So this is our beginning line. Well, when we do this on the board, we'll move right to the pattern paper. So I just want us to have a clear understanding of how pattern drafting works. Okay, so this is our beginning line, beginning top line, like this. And this line is your shoulder. Just assuming that this line, I bring it out and I place it here on my shoulder like this. So every measurement I'll be taking, because I took all my measurements on my body from the shoulder, so every measurement I'm taking is coming down from that line. I hope we understand that. So I'm going to write on this line, I'm going to give it a name, which is going to be our shoulder line. So shoulder line, so that we don't forget. Now this shoulder line, I'm going to, after doing this shoulder line, from the beginning of this shoulder line, I'm going to draw a line coming downwards by the side. This line is called what? Just imagine I took this line out. This line will be in the middle, right at the center of our front or our back. Just know that this line represents the center line. It can be used for the front part of the bodice or the back part of the bodice. So we want to work on the front part of the bodice first. So I'm going to write center line. And I'll put it front center line so that I can, when I'm cutting, moving the pattern to my fabric, I can remember that this pattern is for the front part of the bodice. Now we're going to move forward. So we want to start working with our measurements on the pattern. So assuming this is our pattern, the pattern we're supposed to work on, this is it now. So we want to start, the first thing we'll start with is taking the shoulder measurement. For example, my shoulder measurement, when I took my shoulder measurement initially, if you can recall, I had 15. And I said something about when you're working with your shoulder measurement, you divide that number into 2, divide it by 2. So if we divide 15 by 2, we would end up with 7.5. So I'm going to be measuring 7.5. Where am I going to place my tape? I would place my tape right at the beginning of the shoulder line. Remember, this is the shoulder line. I'm going to, like this. So it looks like this point here, you see this point here, is this point here. while this like this is like this. So because we are dividing it into two, it is assumed that this place should be on fold. So it's like I'm folding my body into two. So if I'm folding my body into two, it means this middle part will be on fold. Do we understand that? I hope we understand that. So it's just imagine I'm placing my tape here. If I place my tape here and measure right to that side where we measured initially, I'll end up with 7.5 after the bone. That's if I'm placing it at the center bone. There's always a bone at the middle of the neck. If I place my tape right there, that's where the body divides from. If I place it right there, I would end up with 7.5. So it is just like I'm taking half of the measurement. So now I'm going to measure 7.5 from this point down to this point. So this is where my shoulder ends. From there, the next thing I'm going to do is I want to get my armhole length. Now, some people would take this tape and measure round. So people will take this tape and measure round. It's okay, but sometimes you might find inaccuracies with such method of taking your armhole measurement. So the best way and the kind of the easiest way to go about that is by dividing the bust measurement. What you have on the bust, after taking your bust circumference, that number you have, you divide it by 6 and add 1.5 to the answer you arrived at after dividing by 6. So for example, my bust is 34. The circumference of my bust is 34. If I divide it by 6, I'll be having 5.6. Then that 5.6, I'm going to add 1.5. That's 1.5. I'm going to add 1.5 inch or 1.5 inch to that 5.6. I would end up with 7.16. So if I'm going to approximate 7.16, I will end up with 7.2. So I'm going to be taking 7.2, but that will be after I've come down by 1 inch from this. Let's write 7.2 so that we don't forget. Armhole length. Armhole length. 7.2. We're going to come back to that. Now let's go to the shoulder. There's what we call the shoulder slant. Because the human body, natural, nobody is straight. The human body is created in such a way that has curves. When you look at the human body, you'll notice that there's a high point on the shoulder. And this part of the shoulder is higher than this part of the shoulder. So it's like there's a slant. So it's not like this. It's not straight. If I place this ruler right at the tip of the top of the highest point of my shoulder, if I place it straight, you'll notice that there's a little gap by the end of my shoulder. So we need to consider that when we're drafting out, because if you make it straight, you end up having a dress that doesn't flow with the body shape of how the shoulder is. So you need to take away that distance from here, from this point here to this point. So that's why we will need to go down from this height, this point, we need to go down by 1 inch. So after going down by 1 inch, then we can come back to our armhole length, which we got initially. Can we remember how we got the armhole length? Just to recall, we divided our bust measurements, which was 34 by 6, and we added 1.5 to it, and we ended up having 7.2 after we approximated it. So 7.2, I'm going to measure 7.2 from this point here, not from this point here. Please don't make that mistake. From this new point, after coming down by 1 inch, we're going to place our tape at that point and come down 7.2, like so. So now, ideally for me to have, I need to rule a straight line. I need to connect this point to this point. But I don't have a T-square here. But if you have, you can use your T-square to have a straight line. T-squares are used to get straight lines, to make your lines straight and accurate. So, but because I don't have a T-square, there's something I can do. I know that from this point to this point, I have 7.5. So what I'll do is, on this line, I will put my tape here and measure 7.5, like so. 7.5. So now I can use my ruler to join those points together so that I can have a straight armhole line, like so. So now I have my armhole line. So this is where my armhole would end. And this point here is this point of the dress. This point is this point of the dress where my bust is. And I will rule a line connecting, a straight line connecting it. And that line, I will name it bust line. So I'm going to do that right away. From here to here, I have 7.2. If I add that 1 inch to it, I'll have 8.2. So I'll have to mark from here to here. This is because I don't have a T-square. I have to mark from here to here 8.2. Just to have a straight line. We're doing all of this right now because I don't have a T-square. For me to have a straight line, because I want to make a straight horizontal line to get my bust line. So now I'm going to connect it like so. And I'm going to name that line bust line. Now, we're going to move to the neck because we need to make the shoulder slant. Now the standard, the neck width. Remember that this line is this line here. I want to know how wide my neck is. So for some people that have a wider neck, from this point to this point, you know, the wideness is from this point to this point. But because we have imagined that this place is on fold, so we have to do our measurement into 2. Whatever we have from here to here, by the time we open up the fold, we'll be having it on both sides. So if I'm going to, the standard is 3 inches for most people. The wideness of their neck from this point to this point is 3, majority. Some people's neck are wider. So if you have a little difference from such a client, you can add like half an inch from the middle, the center line. So I can increase it, like I said. Now I'm going to connect this point to this slant. It means that I'm connecting this point here is this point here, where my neck ends. The wideness of my neck, where it ends. So I want to connect this point to this point. I want to make a line. So this is how to connect it, like so. And so we have our shoulder slant. So the neck width, the neck depth, the length of the neck, how we want it to come up, because we'll have to, of course, wear the dress. So the standard is 3 inches. From this point to what there's a hollow at the neck here. You can, you know, increase it. You can make it deeper, however you want it to be. But the standard is 3 inches. So I'll be using the standard for example. So 3 inches from my shoulder line. Don't forget that this is our shoulder line. So 3 inches from that shoulder line downwards. And this is it. So now I will be needing my French curve. Sorry, if you're new into the sewing line, you'll be working with different tools. So for example, this is a French curve. And this French curve is used to make curves because, like I said, the human body is not straight. We have curves here and there. So you'll be needing this French curve so that you can, you know, have a smooth curve where necessary. So for example, this neck is curved. You can't make it straight. It's curved. If you look at the neck, it's kind of curved. So you need this. So we'll be using this French curve for this neck part. You would also be needing a hip curve. This hip curve is, you know, for the hip as well. Just like I said, the hip is not straight. The human body is not, you know, straight downwards. There's you know, they are curved. Even men, they have curves, you know, but it's more like for women. women have more curves than men. So you'll be needing an hip curve to make your hip area when you're doing the pattern smooth, the curves to make it smooth. You'll be needing a ruler, and I said T-square. I don't have a T-square now, but you will need one when you start pattern drafting. You need a scissors, and you need a pattern scissors. The scissors you'll be using to make your patterns will be different from the scissors you use to cut your fabric. The reason is when you start using a particular scissors to cut your pattern, remember the pattern is a paper, it sometimes tends to get blunt, and you don't want to struggle and have rough edges when you're cutting your fabric. So you need to have a specific scissors specifically meant for cutting your fabric, while another scissors should be meant for only patterns that's on your paper. Okay, I hope we're clear on that. You'll be needing some markers when you're making your patterns, or a pencil, whichever one you're comfortable with. Okay, so let's move ahead. So I'm going to be making my curve like so, my neck curve, and this is how I'll place it. I can decide to maneuver the curves however shape I want. This is a round neck. I want the curve to be like this. So it is assumed that this is on fold. Remember, this front center line is on fold. It means that when I open it up, I'll be ending up with a curve like this. So I want to position it like this. But the most important thing is, however you're going to place that curve, just make sure that the curve doesn't go below that line, that mark you've made here, and this mark that you made here. So make sure it is touching both marks, and you rule like so. So we have our neck shape out. We can see it's already coming out. You're already seeing the bodice coming out. Now, the next thing, we want to get our armhole curve. The armhole is always curved. It's not straight. Almost every part of the human body is not straight. There are curves here and there, like I've said. So we want to make the curve, and how do we go about that? We would place our tape right at where our armhole is, and bend the tape. Can we see that? I hope we can see that. Bend the tape right to where the bust line is, and mark that middle point like so. So that's the middle of our armhole. So our armhole curve, we'll be needing the French curve as well to make that curve, and we will be coming out from this point here. We'll be coming out by ½ an inch. So I'm going to come out by ½ an inch, and I've marked that point. Now I have to connect all the points together, but before I do that, I have to measure my bust measurements. Before I make that curve, I have to measure my bust measurement divided by 4. Remember, I said bust measurement is under the circumference measurement, and it is always divided by 4. So for example, my bust is 34. If I divide it by 4, I should be having 8.5. So I'm going to mark 8.5, and I'm going to place my tape like so, from sideways, from the center front line. I'll be coming 8.5 to the other side, and I'll mark 8.5. Remember, when you're doing your pattern, you need to put side seam allowance. That's allowance that would enable you to be able to stitch the front and the back part together. So you need to add up some allowances, but for now I'll just be making it exactly the measurements. I'm going to be marking my curves now. You need to go in from this point here by ½ an inch. So before I forget to do that, let me do that right away. So I'm going to be going in, not out. So I'm going in by ½ an inch, and this is because I want to create, I don't want some excess fabric on my front bodice. I want it to just flow with my body shape. So I need to go in on the front bodice. I'm specifically saying the front. You don't do that on the back bodice, because the back, we have the backbone. which you know you need that, you actually need that allowance. But for the front part, you don't need that allowance. If not, you're going to have excess fabric having folds there, and you don't want that. So you go in half an inch, and now we can now make our curve. So I'm going to be putting my curve, touching this mark here, touching here, and then please take note, don't allow this curve to go below this bust line. It has to be right on it. So we are going to curve it one after the other. I'm going to connect this one first, then I will connect this one like so. You can see that my curve is not below the bust line. And we have our armhole curve for the front bodice. Now the next thing we're going to do is to mark the other vertical measurements that we need. I'll put it on the screen for us to know the particular measurements we need for the front bodice. So from this shoulder point, remember this point here is this point here, the highest point of your shoulder. And we had some measurements we took. So if I'm going to know from where my waist, the length of my waist from the shoulder, I would place my tape here to know the length of my tape. Please, when you're putting your tape on the shoulder, please don't go in too much and don't go in, come down too much. Just make sure it's right at the bridge of the shoulder. So I'm placing my tape at the bridge of my shoulder. Okay, so I can feel it. And I'm going down. I want to know the length where my bust and my waist is, the length of my waist from my shoulder. So this is it. I have my bust point is 9.5, but I don't need that for this bodice. So I'm not going to be working with that measurement. My under bust is 13 because I can feel it. 13. So this is my under bust. I'm not going to be working with under bust measurements for, you know, creating a bodice. You know, there are other styles that would require such measurements, but I don't need that for this bodice. So I'm going right there. One of the secrets you can use to get the waist, that's the place, if you look at the waist, there's a curve. It's always slimmer than the bust and the hip. But you'll find out that there's some ladies that have a bigger waist. You know, everybody's shape is not the same. So for such people, I would rather you just add 2 inches, 2 to 3 inches, you add it to the under bust measurement. For such people that have, you know, a protruded tummy or their waist is not, you know, obvious. For me, if I know this is my waist, so I can, you know, make a line and I know, okay, my waist is around here. But for someone that you cannot really identify where their waist is, just add 2.5 inch or 2 inches to that under bust measurement, 2 to 3 inches, depending on how you want that bodice to look like. So if I'm going to add 2 inches to this under bust, I would be having 15. My under bust is 13. If I add 2 inches to it, I'll be having 15. So I will take 15 as my shoulder to my waist. So I'll be measuring 15 here, here to here. But because my body is not, there's not much space, I would assume that my waist is somewhere around here. I'll just assume my waist is somewhere around here, just for us to see how the shape is. Just assuming that this is where 15 falls to, so that we can have a clear view of, you know, the body's pattern on this board. So I would assume that this is where 15 is. I'll mark 15 here as my waistline, and I'll make that's why the T-square is very, very useful. You know, it will be very, very useful because you don't need to start trying to measure. It just gives you a straight line. You just place the T-square and have a straight line from left to right or from the top to the bottom. So I would make a straight line on that mark and I will name it my waistline. So this is my waistline. We need to extend this center front a little bit downwards. Okay. So I'm going to measure the circumference of my waist. My waist is 29, and don't forget I said the circumference measurements, you divide them by 4, except for the semi circumference measurements, which is the thigh, because I have 2 legs, my hand, my arm, I have 2 arms, so that one you have to divide by 2. But every other measurement that has to do with circumference is divided by 4. So my waist is 29. If I divide 29 by 4, I would have 7.25. That's 7 1/4. So I'm measuring 7 1/4 here. And I'm placing my tape just like I did on the bust line. 7 1/4. Now I'm assuming that I'll need some form of darts. You know, darts. For people that are new into this into the sewing career, or you just started your sewing journey, you might be asking, what is a dart? Darts are used to give shapes, you know, to create, because of those excesses you might find. Just like I've always been emphasizing on from the beginning of this video, that the human body is not straight. So you need to make sure that everything you're doing has to flow with the body shape. So that is what we use darts for. So we need to put that on the waist, because if we miss out putting that on the waist, you will have some fabrics, you know, coming out. It will not flow smoothly with the body. So that's the work of that being on your bodice or your gown or anything you're doing. Even when you're making pants, you need some form of that, except the fabric is a stretchy fabric. Okay, if the fabric is stretchy, you might not really need that, because the stretchy fabric will usually hug your body. Okay, so I'm going to add 1 inch because of that dart to that waist. So after I've marked my waistline, I'm going to add 1 inch. I will be adding 1 inch sewing allowance, and I'm going to be adding it as well to my bust. My bust region, I'm not going to add 1 inch allowance. I'm going to be adding 2 inch allowance. You know, the bust can be very funny. You need some form of more allowance to the bust. So if at the end of the day, after stitching the bodies together, you can actually reduce it back. But when you're pattern drafting, please add the allowance. It's better to have more allowance than to have shortage in allowance. If you have more, when you're done stitching and you've gotten, you know, what the size you want, you can reduce. You can go and reduce the seam allowance. But if the allowance is not enough, you know, that's going to be a problem, and you don't want to be in that shoes. So it's better, always better, add enough allowance to your pattern or to the fabric when you're cutting. So I've added 2 inch, and most places that you find problems when the allowance is not enough is always the bust, because sometimes you find some ladies, even some ladies during their there's some periods you see them, their bust is feeling fuller, while sometimes, you know, it's not feeling full. So you just need that, you know, more allowance in case. Okay, having said that, let's move right ahead. So I'm going to extend this line because I need to create my hip line, because we're making a bodice. I hope we know what a bodice is. For people that are not familiar, what's a bodice? A bodice is just like a top. It's just a basic top. Yes, a basic top that is not hasn't to do with style. Just a basic top. That's what a bodice is. So I'm going to extend this center front line downwards so that I can have my hip line. So because there's no this board is not long enough, I don't know if we can see the board very clearly. So I need to know the distance from my shoulder to my hip, but I'm not going to place my tape and start measuring where my hip is. So there's a way we usually get that, and this is how you get it from your waistline. Most women, the distance from, and most ladies, the distance from their waist to their hip is between 8 and 9. So there's some people that are tall, they fall under the category of 9. while people that have, have average height or short, they can fall under 8. Then people that are shorter, you can do 7.5 for them. It's fine, it will still work. So I'm going to be using 8 inches because I am not on the long side. So I'll assume that this from here to here is 8 inches. This is just an assumption, just for you to have an idea. I'm assuming that the distance from here to here is 8. When we go on the pattern, we use the exact measurement, but this is just an illustration, because this is, don't forget, this is an introduction to pattern drafting. So this line is now our hip line, and I'm going to make a straight line like I've always done, like I did for the bust line and I did for the waist line. So this is my hip line, assuming. Now the hip line, I'm going to be measuring, let me write it there, hip line. I'm going to be measuring measuring my hip, but I've done that already. My hip is 40. If I divide it by 4, because it's also a circumference measurement that has to do with 360 degree, I'm going to divide it by 4, which will give me 10. So I'll mark 10 and add my seam allowance to it. And I'll add my seam allowance to it. So my seam allowance is 1 inch. Remember, I added 2 inch at the bust just because of the reasons I gave why you need to add, because of the variances with bust issues. But at the end of the day, I would reduce that 1 inch, an extra 1 inch that was added to the bust region when I'm done sewing. So I'm going to add, I want to connect all of my, I want to connect the marks, the points together, like so. So I'm connecting here. Or rather, let's just connect from the seam allowance. I went like this. And now I want to, because the hip is coming out. From here is going in. That's why my French curve is like this. But now, from the waist to the hip is coming out. So the body is like this, like this. That's why I'm going to turn my French curve the other way to come out. Like so. So I hope we can have a clear view on that. So this is on fold. Please don't forget, because I've had students making these mistakes a lot. This mistake in particular, placing their fabric, not placing it on fold, and ending up with just half of the front part. So please don't forget to put your fabric on fold. And when I say on fold, let me just give you an illustration. This is a fabric. If I want to fold my fabric to cut out this pattern, I would be folding it into 2. This is what I mean by unfold. I would place however I want the pattern. This is an Ankara. If I want the pattern to flow vertically, I would place my fabric like this and put on fold. And if I want this pattern to be like this, I would put my fabric on fold like this. This is what I mean on fold. So this fold here is here. So when I want to, like this is what I mean. And so this top, so when you're done with your pattern, you're going to place your pattern on your fabric like this. So you're not going to place your fabric like this. If you place it like this, it means you're just cutting half of the front bodice. Okay, so till next time, this will be the end of this video. Till next time, we'll be talking more on pattern drafting. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you gained value and you learned a lot. So please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time of watching or being on this channel rather. Okay, it will be awesome if you subscribe, and you need to click on the notification bell so that you would always get to see the lovely videos I get to post here. Also, don't forget to like this video and share with your friends and families, those people that this will be very helpful to. Thank you very much, and God bless.